Welcome to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM, the Superstation, the Future Radio. I'm your host, Brother Michael M. Hotep. It is Wednesday, April 21st, 2021, and we are live. Hope everybody's doing well today. It's been a very, very busy day, and I just finished teaching my last session of ended up being 11 weeks this time. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach them in school. This was a very good online class that I teach, and we dealt with thousands of years of history and what led up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. All right, so we know that a lot of fallout is taking place and a lot of discussion, and we know that a lot of Republicans are upset that Derek Chauvin was found guilty. You have a lot of Republicans, you have Black conservatives, you have people like Tucker Carlson, things like this. And the day after Derek Chauvin was found guilty on all three counts, Attorney General Merrick Garland has announced that he's going to do an investigation into the patterns and practices of the Minneapolis Police Department, which is good news because under the Trump administration, they basically stopped investigations into the patterns and practices of police departments. And if you remember that it was Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who was totally against criminal justice reform. Attorney General Jeff Sessions, early in his tenure, said that they were basically going to take a step back, take a hands-off approach or something like that towards policing, because he felt that trying to hold police accountable was bad for their morale. So we're going to talk some about this today, because this is why a lot of people, one of the reasons why a lot of people voted for Joe Biden in the first place, because Donald Trump was totally against holding police accountable. Okay, Trump reluctantly supported the First Step Act, but he nominated two attorney generals who were against criminal justice reform, and neither one of them thought systemic racism existed in policing. We all remember the interview with Attorney General William Barr, who said he didn't think systemic racism in policing existed. Okay, so we'll talk some about this dealing with Minneapolis, Minnesota. And we know that Police Chief Arredondo said he welcomes the investigation and they need one there. There's some other places they need them also. Then there was a story that I saw about a little more than a week or so ago. And then I think it was in the New York Times. And then the Washington Post has an update to this story. And this deals with menthol cigarettes. Menthol cigarettes. The FDA, Food and Drug Administration, is weighing a ban on menthol cigarettes. And menthol cigarettes disproportionately addict and kill African Americans. Menthol cigarettes disproportionately addict and kill African Americans. After a half century of big tobacco, the big tobacco industry, big tobacco companies marketing menthol cigarettes to the African American community, the Food and Drug Administration is pressured to enact a ban. This is an example of how elections have consequences. Menthol cigarettes should be banned. And we know that menthol cigarettes are disproportionately targeted towards African Americans also, just like malt liquor. So we'll talk about that on today's show as well. Now, some people are asking the question, well, how much time is Derek Chauvin going to get? Okay, we hear he's on suicide watch 1. That's to be expected. And he's in a cell 23 hours a day. They don't have him in general population. That's to be expected also. But some people are asking how many years will he get? Okay. And NBC News has an article dealing with that as well. So we'll talk a little bit about that also. Now, on the African History Network show, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world. Because right now it's corrects wrong behavior. What you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you and get away with is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you have been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. So when you control the radius of a man or woman's thoughts, you can control the circumference of his or her actions, because the mind can't do or teach what it doesn't know. Now, we deal with a number of different topics here on the African History Network show. We deal with current events in history and politics, education, economic empowerment, entrepreneurship, love, sex, health issues, and much, much more, and relationships. Sometimes I forget relationships. I go straight to sex. I forget relationships. No, I shouldn't say that. Okay. Anyway. But yeah, there's relationships, love, sex, and health issues. Okay. We need to talk about relationships first. But so we deal with all this in a number of different topics also. If you like this type of information, you can support the African History Network, $ the AHN show through Cash App, $ the AHN show through Cash App, also through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN show, paypal.me/the AHN show, or through our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com as well. Okay. And we're here 6 days a week. That helps us keep doing the research, stay on the air, keep broadcasting, et cetera, pay some of the bills, et cetera. All right, we're coming up on a break. We'll be back in just a minute. When we come back, we're going to talk about Attorney General Merrick Garland announcing an investigation into the Minneapolis Police Department just one day after Derek Chauvin was found guilty on all 3 charges. And then also, because of the Chauvin verdict, this injects new momentum into the discussion of overhauling, into the discussion of police reform and the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. Listen to the African History Network show. We'll be back in a few minutes. All right, stand by, everybody. Stand by. We'll be back in just a minute. We'll be back in 3 minutes. Stand by. Stand by. How's everybody doing? All right, who we have here? Stand by. We're back from break in just a minute. We have Chantel, Erica, Chantel, Ruby. Just a few of the people watching. Share this broadcast on social media platforms. Invite your friends to tune in. Stand by, back from break in 2 minutes. All right, y'all can register for my online course.
910, the Superstation, Detroit's only African-American talk radio.
Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM Superstation, the Future Radio. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Wednesday, April 21st, 2021, and we are live. Hope everybody's doing well. Yesterday it was snowing in Detroit. It's crazy weather that we're having. So right before the break, I was talking about Attorney General Merrick Garland announcing an investigation into the Minneapolis Police Department and the patterns and practices of the Minneapolis Police Department. Okay, and this is very, very important because during the Trump administration, and I've talked about this a number of times, during the Trump administration, they backed off of holding police accountable. And this is one of the reasons why many police officers supported Donald Trump in the first place. Okay, because they said that the Obama administration put the shackles on police and Donald Trump was going to take the shackles off of police. Okay, and this is, Donald Trump was very pro-police. He didn't talk about systemic racism in policing. He nominated two attorney generals who basically said systemic racism in policing didn't exist either. Okay, so if we look at this, I want to look at first NBC Nightly News. We're going to go here. I'm going to pull this up. Department of Justice launches investigation into Minneapolis Police Department in wake of Chauvin verdict. We're going to go to clip one in just a second, Shakita. And let me pull this up here. So a day after former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin was convicted on all counts in the murder of George Floyd, the Justice Department has announced a civil rights investigation into the Minneapolis Police Department. Okay. Now, the ability to investigate police departments was given to Congress in 1994. That's part of the 1994 crime bill that everybody talks about, but very few people actually understand. That's part of the 94 crime bill. A lot of people don't know this. Now, Attorney General Merrick Garland said the inquiry will examine whether the department engages in a pattern or practice of policing that violates the U.S. Constitution or federal civil rights laws. Department of Justice investigators will look at whether Minneapolis police use excessive force, including during protests, or engage in discriminatory conduct, Attorney General Merrick Garland said. They will also examine whether Minneapolis police have treated people with behavioral health disabilities unlawfully. Has the Minneapolis Police Department treated people with behavioral health disabilities unlawfully? Okay, we're going to go to clip one. This is from the press conference today that Attorney General Merrick Garland had announced in this investigation. Let's go to this clip, Shakita.
So many of you have closely watched the events in Minnesota. Although the state's prosecution was successful, I know that nothing can fill the void that the loved ones of George Floyd have felt since his death. My heart goes out to them and to all those who have experienced similar loss. I know such wounds have deep roots, and that too many communities have experienced those wounds firsthand. Yesterday's verdict in the state criminal trial does not address potentially systemic policing issues in Minneapolis. Today, I'm announcing that the Justice Department has opened a civil investigation to determine whether the Minneapolis Police Department engages in a pattern or practice of unconstitutional or unlawful policing. This effort will be staffed by experienced attorneys and other personnel from the Justice Department Civil Rights Division and the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Minnesota. The new civil investigation is separate from and independent of the federal criminal investigation into the death of George Floyd that the Justice Department has previously announced. Congress gave the department the authority to conduct civil practice, pattern or practice investigations, which look beyond individual incidents to assess systemic failures. Those investigations allow the department to determine whether a police department has a pattern or practice of unconstitutional or unlawful policing. The investigation I am announcing today will assess whether the Minneapolis Police Department engages in a pattern or practice of using excessive force, including during protests. The investigation will also assess whether the MPD engages in discriminatory conduct and whether its treatment of those with behavioral health disabilities is unlawful. It will include a comprehensive review of the Minneapolis Police Department's policies, training, supervision, and use of force investigations. It will assess the effectiveness of the MPD's current systems of accountability and whether other mechanisms are needed to ensure constitutional and lawful policing. Broad participation in this investigation from the community and from law enforcement will be vital to its success. The Justice Department has already begun to reach out to community groups and members of the public to learn about their experiences with the MPD. We also seek to hear from the department's officers about the training and support they receive because their perspective is essential. All these voices will help provide investigators the information they need to conduct a comprehensive assessment. All these voices will be critical to the reform efforts that will follow if the investigation determines the existence of constitutional or statutory violations. If the Justice Department concludes that there is reasonable cause to believe there is a pattern or practice of unconstitutional or unlawful policing, we will issue a public report of our conclusions. The Justice Department also has the authority to bring a civil lawsuit asking a federal court to provide adjunctive relief that orders the MPD to change its policies and practices to avoid further violations. Usually when the Justice Department finds unlawful practices or patterns of practices, the local police department enters into a settlement agreement or a consent decree to ensure that prompt and effective action is taken to align policing practices with the law. Most of our nation's law enforcement officers do their difficult jobs honorably and lawfully. I strongly believe that good officers do not want to work in systems that allow bad practices. Good officers welcome accountability because accountability is an essential part of building trust with the community, and public safety requires public trust. I have been involved in the legal system in one way or another for most of my adult life. I know that justice is sometimes slow, sometimes elusive, sometimes never comes. The Department of Justice will be unwavering in its pursuit of equal justice under law. The challenges we face are deeply woven into our history. They did not arise today or last year. Building trust between community and law enforcement will take time and effort by all of us. But we undertake this task with determination and urgency, knowing that change cannot wait. Thank you.
Okay, so that was Attorney General Merrick Garland at a press conference today, announcing an investigation into the Minneapolis Police Department. Now, Derek Chauvin faces up to 75 years in prison when he's sentenced in 8 weeks. It's supposed to take place sometime in June 2021. He is currently being held at Oak Park Heights State Prison, and the Minnesota Department of Corrections has released a new mugshot of him in an orange jumpsuit. Okay, we'll show you a picture of that as well. That's going viral also. We posted that on our Facebook fan page, the African History Network, the African History Network. So a lot of people are talking about that. Let's see here. Let's we got a front view and a side view of Derek Chauvin. Let's look at this here. Minnesota Department of Corrections. So he's going viral once again. Look at that right there. All right. Offender locator. Okay. All right. So let's see. Zoom out. All right. So we have the investigation as well that Merrick Garland announced today. Now, there's a piece from the Washington Post that I was reading. Garland announces Justice Department probe into Minneapolis police. And I remember the investigations into the patterns and practice of police departments. One took place in the Detroit Police Department years ago. And in this article here from the Washington Post, it says such investigations often took months or years to complete, generally resulted in local police departments reaching a court-enforced agreement with the Justice Department over changes. Some analysts have questioned the effectiveness of pattern or practice investigations. A Washington Post review in 2015 of such interventions found that they led to modernized policies, equipment, and training, but they produced mixed results on the use of force. I think now you have there's even greater momentum when it comes to policing reform. So hopefully, because I think you're going to see more investigations to the patterns and practices of police departments now under the Biden administration, and because the Trump administration basically did almost zero. Not only that, when Jeff Sessions became Attorney General, he tried to back out of the consent decrees with the Baltimore Police Department and the Chicago Police Department, but a federal judge would not let the Department of Justice back out of those consent decrees. Now, Attorney General Merrick Garland said that the civil investigation will examine whether Minneapolis police have engaged in excessive force or discriminatory conduct. Okay, we talked about that already. All right, read this article here from the Post. Garland announces Justice Department probe into Minneapolis police. Garland announces Justice Department probe into Minneapolis police. All right, I want to go to this second clip here. We're going to go to clip 2. Shakita, this is from NBC News, MSNBC News, Craig Melvin. They are discussing the press conference and the announcement from Attorney General Merrick Garland. Pete Williams, the Justice Department correspondent, Pete Williams, says he calls this a review with teeth. Pete Williams on what the Department of Investigation, the DOJ investigation into Minneapolis PD could do. Let's go to this clip. Take it off mute.
Following that big announcement from the Attorney General last hour. And then we see Shaquille Brewster. He is in Oak Park Heights, Minnesota. He's outside that maximum security prison where Derek Chauvin awakened for the first time this morning. He's being held there. It's about 15 minutes east of downtown Minneapolis. But Pete, first to you, just explain, if you can, what this DOJ probe into patterns and practices, what that means. What will they specifically be looking for here in Minneapolis?
So it's more than just a review. The Attorney General said it would result in a report, but this is a review with teeth. The Attorney General said it will look at how the police handle force issues. Do they use excessive force? Do they discriminate against people? How do they handle people with mental health problems? How do they handle people during public demonstrations, which has been a big issue? All of those questions, hiring, training, recruitment, all those things the Justice Department will look at. And the question is, are any of these things violating federal law or the Constitution? Is there, as they say, a pattern or practice of this illegal or unconstitutional conduct? Now, the Justice Department has had authority to conduct these investigations since Congress gave it this power in 1994 after the widespread public protest over the televised police beating of Rodney King. And under this authority, the government can make recommendations and insist that the department make changes. And if the department refuses, then the Justice Department can go to court and seek a court order requiring compliance. There have been about 70 of these investigations since 1994. They've resulted in about 40 agreements, either court enforced or voluntary, with local police departments and sheriff's offices. And today's announcement is really a big turnaround in government policy, because under the Trump administration, under then Attorney General Jeff Sessions, he virtually shut the faucet off for these investigations. He thought they were bad for police departments and didn't do any good. Just last Friday, Attorney General Garland rescinded that memo, opening the door to doing these again. And then today, with an announcement today that it'll start, and has already started in Minneapolis, talking to community groups, talking to people, talking to police officers to begin this investigation.
Okay, pause it right there. Okay, so last Friday, I mentioned this when I was on Roland Martin Unfiltered. I mentioned the announcement from Attorney General Merrick Garland that he was rescinding the policy from the Trump administration that basically stopped the investigations into the patterns and practices of police departments. This is an example of how elections have consequences. Okay, see, a lot of people that said don't vote in 2016 didn't tell you about the investigations in the police departments because they don't know this stuff, because they don't study any of this. Okay, they were just talking nonsense. All right, now the Devin Chauvin conviction has caused more talk and given momentum to trying to get the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act passed. There's an article from the Washington Post I'm going to go to. This is from April 21st, 2021. Chauvin verdict injects a fresh jolt of momentum into police overhaul efforts. Chauvin verdict injects a fresh jolt of momentum into police overhaul efforts. All right. And this is Senator Scott, Black Tea Party Republican, who said he's not voting for reparations in the U.S. Senate, even though reparations will help African Americans. And South Carolina, where he's from, is where the Civil War started. And he said he's not voting for reparations. And he supported Donald Trump also. He voted not to impeach Donald Trump as well. That Tim Scott. Okay, this one right here. Okay, just so you know who we're talking about. So the guilty verdict in the murder of George Floyd has injected new momentum into efforts by the White House and Congress to overhaul policing practices, with bipartisan talks picking up speed as President Joe Biden prepares to highlight the topic in his address to a joint session of Congress next week. Now, the chief GOP negotiator in the issue, Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina, said Wednesday that his discussion with Democrats could wrap up in the next week or so, as he sketched out potential areas of compromise, particularly on the sensitive matter of whether officers can be sued for misconduct. Now, Democrats and civil rights activists, meanwhile, said they would push to pass legislation by the first anniversary of George Floyd's death on May 25th. Now, it's not clear that any Republicans are going to vote for the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. You may get one, maybe two, maybe let's say a black guy. Go vote for that. Okay, go vote for that. They may tell Tim Scott to vote for it. I don't know. You may get one, possibly two. I don't think it's going to be more than that. Not sure if Joe Manchin of West Virginia is going to vote for it, though. Democrat from West Virginia. Now, the flurry of talks as the White House sought to seize a potentially fleeting moment of opportunity on policing revisions, a priority that President Joe Biden has embraced, but that has often taken a backseat to others. The White House is strategizing with civil rights groups and police organizations, and Attorney General Merrick Garland on Wednesday announced the Justice Department would launch an investigation into the practices of the Minneapolis Police Department, as we just talked about. Now, much of the activity is unfolding behind the scenes. Jen Psaki, White House press secretary, said today at a White House press secretary briefing, she said, quote, "There are times, and this is true in diplomacy, but also in legislation, that the best strategy is to provide the space for those conversations to happen privately, and that's part of our objective." Now, the result is a sense of movement. Okay, end quote. The result is a sense of movement not seen since the immediate aftermath of George Floyd's murder last year by former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin. Quote, "There's an urgency in this country now. There's an urgency in this country now. There's an urgency last month. There's been an urgency since I was a young Black man in my teens getting pulled over by the police and scared for my life," said Senator Cory Booker, Democrat from New Jersey, who has been working quietly with Senator Tim Scott and Representative Karen Bass, of Democrat of California, on a potential compromise bill. So Senator Cory Booker said, "So we definitely have to get something done." All right. Now, still, similar efforts to revise policing practices last summer fell victim to election year politics, and it is far from clear that the policy differences that have stymied lawmakers can be abridged, including how aggressively to restrict the type of chokehold used by Derek Chauvin on George Floyd, and whether to revise the qualified immunity standard that broadly protects police from lawsuits. Okay. Now, the history of qualified immunity ties into the civil rights movement, and I want to pull up a piece here that deals with this. But the history of qualified immunity is rooted in racism and ties into the civil rights movement. Okay, so qualified immunity entwined with the U.S. History of racism and the struggle against it emerged during the civil rights movement. Throughout 1961, groups of activists known as freedom riders, and we know that John Lewis was a freedom rider also. Okay, the Honorable John Lewis, the late John Lewis, he was a freedom rider as well. And this dealt with, and I'm going to pull up a picture here. This is from 1961. This is from when one of the buses that they were on in 1961 was set on fire. This is an article from blackpast.org, dealing with the freedom riders. We'll come back to that in just a second. So throughout 1961, groups of activists known as freedom riders challenged segregation in interstate public transit stations in the South. The Supreme Court had outlawed such segregation in a ruling the previous year, 1962. But local police still arrested hundreds of protesters who descended on the South to enter whites only or colored only areas of bus and train stations. Okay. Now, just 1 second here. Let me change the caption here. All right, there we go. Okay, so the Supreme Court had outlawed such segregation in a ruling in 1962, but local police still arrested hundreds of protesters who descended on the South to enter whites only or colored only areas of bus and train stations. With that backdrop, the Reverend Robert L. Pearson, Pierson, a white Episcopal priest, and 14 other priests, both African American and white, knew they were risking arrest or worse when they boarded a bus on September 12, 1961. September 12, 1961. All right, let me pull up this here. Okay. So they boarded a bus on September 12, 1961 on what they called a prayer pilgrimage. Now, in less than 48 hours, when the group entered a whites-only area of a bus terminal in Jackson, Mississippi for lunch, all 15 were arrested and jailed for breach of peace. All 15 were arrested or jailed for breach of peace. Now, a local judge sentenced the priest to the maximum 4 months in jail plus a $200 fine each. The maximum 4 months in jail plus a $200 fine each. Okay. Now, the charges were dismissed on appeal. The priest then turned around and sued the police under Section 1983 of the Ku Klux Klan Act for violating their civil rights through unlawful arrest. So the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871, you've heard me talk about that before, right? The Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871. So these priests are then going to be, the charges are going to be dismissed. They're going to turn around and sue the police under Section 1983 of the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871 for violating their civil rights through unlawful arrest. The act is one of 3 laws passed in the early 1870s to protect Black people from civil rights violations. Now, this article is from Reuters.com. It was actually 4. This is what's called the Force Acts. FORCE, the Force Acts. It was actually 4 of them passed. The Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871 is the 3rd of the 4 Force Acts. Okay, and actually, we'll talk about that in just a second here. There's a piece from the Zen Education Project on this, because originally I was going to talk about this on today's show, but I wasn't sure about time. But since it's part of this story, also we're going to try to squeeze this in because the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871 was signed into law April 20th, 1871. Okay, so April 20th, 2021 was the anniversary of the signing of the Ku Klux Klan Act, of it being signed into law. This is the origins of qualified immunity that is central. That's part of the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act right now. The debate over qualified immunity has its roots in the civil rights movement, but they're using the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871 to sue police, which is why qualified immunity came into existence in the first place. This all deals with history. So we'll talk about a little of the history of the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871 in just a minute. So the priest then turned around and sued the police under Section 1983 of the Ku Klux Klan Act for violating their civil rights through unlawful arrest. The act is actually 4 laws passed in the early 1870s to protect African Americans from civil rights violations. After a jury decided against the priests, they appealed to the New Orleans-based Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. That court identified errors in the trial and ordered that a new one be held. The court identified errors in the trial and ordered that a new trial be held. The Fifth Circuit also ruled that the police were not immune from the federal lawsuit, a conclusion that the officers appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. By then, Chief Justice Earl Warren's High Court had handed down many landmark decisions that expanded the civil rights of African Americans, including Brown versus Board of Education, which struck down segregation in schools in 1954. But on April 11th, 1967, the Supreme Court justices dealt a blow to Reverend Pearson and other plaintiffs who would file similar lawsuits in the demands to come, in the decades to come, I should say, similar lawsuits in the decades to come. Now, Chief Justice Earl Warren wrote in his opinion that while police are not entitled to, quote, absolute and unqualified immunity, end quote, while police are not entitled to absolute and unqualified immunity, end quote, and I'm going to switch over here and show you the text here just a second, because see, this is very important. This deals with history and law. Unfortunately, many of us, it's not our fault necessarily, but unfortunately, many of us don't understand either one. A lot of white people don't understand history and law either. Okay, most white people are ignorant of history and ignorant of the U.S. Constitution. I don't mean ignorant as in stupid. I mean, it's the programming. A lot of this is not taught in school. So Warren wrote, Chief Justice Warren wrote in his opinion that while police are not entitled to, quote, absolute and unqualified immunity, officers should not be held liable, quote, if they acted in good faith and with probable cause in making an arrest under a statute that they believed to be valid. Okay, officers should not be held liable, quote, if they acted in good faith and with probable cause in making an arrest under a statute that they believed to be valid, end quote. This is the origins of qualified immunity. It's coming from the U.S. Supreme Court, and it ties into the civil rights movement. Now, the officers had argued that they believed arresting the priest for breach of peace was justifiable because the aim was to prevent violence. Okay, the aim was to prevent violence. And let me bring back up the picture here. Okay. Yeah, this bus was firebombed 1961, the Freedom Riders. Okay. So Greyhound, I remember they burned a Greyhound bus. All right, let's continue. So the priest had argued that the officer's intent was not to prevent violence, but to enforce segregation in violation of the priest's constitutional rights. This is the argument of the priest. They're saying, wait a second, you're not trying to prevent violence, okay? You're trying to enforce segregation, and enforcing segregation is a violation of our constitutional rights. Now, Chief Justice Earl Warren's idea that officers acting in good faith should not be held accountable for federal civil rights violations laid the groundwork for today's interpretation of qualified immunity for police. The concept evolved as the courts worked to develop an objective test for whether an officer acted reasonably. Today, even if officers are found to have violated a person's rights, judges must grant immunity if they find no clear precedent putting officers on notice that their actions were out of line. The Reverend Pearson ruling was a departure from the Chief Justice Earl Warren's court's progressive rulings on civil rights. Just months later, the court found that laws banning interracial marriage were illegal in Loving versus Virginia. That's 1967. Okay, read this article here from Reuters, Reuters.com. It's called Rooted in Racism. Rooted in Racism. And it deals with the origins of qualified immunity when it deals with policing. Okay. And this ties into history. This ties into the history of the civil rights movement. And then this goes back to the Reconstruction era and the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871. All right, look, we're out of time here. Those watching on Facebook and YouTube, keep watching. We're going to keep broadcasting on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, and our YouTube channel, Michael M. Hotep. Right now, it's correct wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever. We'll talk to you tomorrow night. Peace. All right, stand by. We're going to keep going. Stand by. All right. You can register for my new online class that starts up Saturday, April 21st, Saturday, April 24th, Saturday, April 24th, Saturday, April 24th. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understand the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. This is going to be a 9-week, 18-hour online course that I teach. We deal with thousands of years of history and what led up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. All right. So I do a PowerPoint presentation. We have video clips, book references. It's an online course you can watch from around the world. We do the class live. All the classes are archived, so you can go back and watch them over and over again. Classes regularly $130, on sale $80. You can register now. As soon as you register, you can watch bonus content because you can watch the sessions of the class that we just ended. All right. Okay, let's continue here with qualified immunity and dealing with this history. So I'm going to go back to the article here from the Washington Post. And this is dealing with how momentum has picked up when it comes to policing reform and the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. All right. So it's far from clear that the policy differences that have stymied lawmakers can be bridged, including how aggressively to restrict the type of chokehold used by Derek Chauvin on George Floyd and whether to revise the qualified immunity standard that broadly protects police from lawsuits. And some activists worried that lawmakers would take the Derek Chauvin verdict as evidence that the system works and no change is needed. Some activists worry that lawmakers would take the Derek Chauvin verdict as evidence that the system works and no change is needed, rather than a sign of broad problems with policing. For all his empathetic rhetoric about the need to pass legislation on the use of force in policing, Joe Biden has taken a different approach in his area than he has on coronavirus relief or infrastructure, where he has hosted bipartisan groups of lawmakers, which with much fanfare in an effort to tangibly portray efforts at a compromise. The low-profile strategy is deliberate, White House officials say, as a way to give breathing room for sensitive negotiations to take place without the president appearing to apply undue pressure or take credit for any progress. Instead, Biden has discussed the issue in private with the Congressional Black Caucus. They just met last week, while his senior aides on the White House Domestic Policy Council and Office of Public Engagement have kept tabs on the legislative efforts. Okay, read the rest of this article here. This is from the Washington Post. Chauvin verdict injects a fresh jolt of momentum into police overhaul efforts. All right, we'll post this link here. And then the Zen Education Project has a has a piece here dealing with the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871. It was signed into law April 20th, 1871. Okay. This is at the Zen Education Project under this day in history. So on April 20th, just a second. On April 20th, 1871, President Ulysses S. Grant signed the Ku Klux Klan Act, which enforced the 14th Amendment by guaranteeing all citizens of the United States the rights afforded by the Constitution and provided legal protection under the law. Now, this bill was intended to counter violent white supremacist backlash against the protections affirmed by the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution that extended civil and legal protections to formerly enslaved citizens and prohibited states from disenfranchising voters on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude, dealing with enslaved Africans. Now, white supremacists, including organized members of the Ku Klux Klan, terrorized African Americans for exercising their right to vote, running for public office, and serving on juries. In response to the violent unrest and suppression of civil liberties, Congress passed a series of what are known as enforcement acts in 1870 and 1871. Among other protections, it empowered the president to use military force to protect African Americans. Okay. And Ulysses S. Grant is actually going to do this. And I think it was October of 1871. He's going to use the he's going to declare martial law in South Carolina. Okay. He's going to declare martial law in South Carolina. There's a piece from Senate.gov that talks about this. Now, the Ku Klux Klan Act was the third of the enforcement acts passed during Reconstruction to defend the rights of Black citizens. The first enforcement act reinforced the 15th Amendment, universal manhood suffrage. The second act placed all Southern elections under federal control. The third protected the voter registration and justice system from infiltration and intimidation by the Ku Klux Klan. The six black members who served in the Congress, the U.S. Congress, in which these bills were considered, and those and whose elections were marred by extrajudicial violence, nearly universally supported the legislation. Congressman Robert Elliott of South Carolina rallied his white colleagues to support the third act, the KKK Act of 1871. Here's a picture of Congressman Robert Elliott of South Carolina. He said, "If you cannot now protect the loyal men of the South, then have the loyal people of this great republic done and suffered much in vain. Then have the loyal people of this great republic done and suffered much in vain. And your free constitution is a mockery and a snare," he said. Now, the enforcement acts authorized the president to intervene in the formal rebel states that attempted to deny any person or any class of persons of the equal protection of the laws or of equal privileges or immunities under the laws. To take action against this newly defined federal law, the president could suspend habeas corpus, deploy the U.S. military, or use other means as he may deem necessary. Opponents denounced the bill as an unconstitutional attack on state governments and individual liberty. Nearly 6 months later, in October 1871, President Ulysses S. Grant used these powers in several South Carolina counties, demonstrating the willingness of the Republican-led federal government to take decisive action to protect the civil and political rights of the freed people during Reconstruction. Okay. Let's see here. Okay, this is some more information on the Force Acts. There's a tweet here. Historian and teach Stephen West has a tweet here. Historian and teach Reconstruction campaign advisor Stephen West offers several Twitter threads about the Act's history and legacy. Terrorism surged in the Carolinas and elsewhere in the South in late 1870, early 1871. President Grant urged passage of the new Enforcement Act in a special message to Congress. All right, if we look at the article from Senate.gov, which is the official website of the U.S. Senate, Senate.gov. They have a article here dealing with the Enforcement Acts of 1870 and 1871. This is from Senate.gov, official website of the U.S. Senate. Okay. And it talks about, I think it's in this one, they talk about South Carolina. Is it this one here? Yeah, President Ulysses has submitted several War Department and Enforcement Act. Not blacks. Okay. The Third Enforcement Act dated April 71 empowered the president to use armed forces to combat those who conspire to deny equal protection of the laws. While the Force Acts and the public generally, while the Force Acts and the publicity generated by the Joint Committee temporarily helped put an end to the violence and intimidation, the end of formal Reconstruction in 1877 allowed for a return of large-scale disenfranchisement of African Americans. Okay, so check that out. Here's a piece from Equal Justice Initiative, EJI.org, Equal Justice Initiative. This deals with when martial law was declared in South Carolina. Violence by KKK in South Carolina forces President Grant to declare martial law. This was using the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871. Okay, here's a lithograph or depiction from the Library of Congress. Let's see here, violence. Okay, in April 1871, President Grant signed the KKK Act, which made it a federal crime to deprive American citizens of their civil rights through racial terrorism. On October 12th, 1871, President Grant warned 9 South Carolina counties with prevalent KKK activity that martial law would be declared if the Klan did not disperse. The warning was ignored. On October 17th, 1871, President Ulysses S. Grant declared martial law and suspended the writ of habeas corpus in the same 9 counties. Once he did so, federal forces were allowed to arrest and imprison KKK members. Okay, once he did so, federal forces were allowed to arrest and imprison KKK members and instigators of racial terrorism without bringing them before a judge or into court. Okay, this is suspending the writ of habeas corpus. Now, many affluent KKK members fled the jurisdiction to avoid arrest, but by December 1871, approximately 600 Klansmen were in jail. More than 200 arrestees were indicted, 53 pleaded guilty, and 5 were convicted at trial. Okay, only 5 convicted at trial, 53 pleaded guilty. Klan terrorism in South Carolina decreased significantly after the arrest and trials, but racial violence targeting Black people continued throughout the South for decades. So check this out at EJI.org, Equal Justice Initiative. Violence by KKK in South Carolina forces President Grant to declare martial law. Okay. So lastly, we're going to talk about this briefly. We'll probably talk about this some more maybe tomorrow or the next day. I saw a couple weeks, maybe about a week, 10 days ago, information dealing with menthol cigarettes and calls for a ban on menthol cigarettes. Okay. And then there's a piece from the Washington Post from April 20th, 2021 that talked about this as well. FDA, Food and Drug Administration, are weighing a ban on menthol cigarettes, which disproportionately addict and kill African Americans, disproportionately addict and kill African Americans. So if we look at this here quickly from the Washington Post. This is okay, hold on. Let me pull up this article just a second here. All right. Okay, FDA weighs ban on menthol cigarettes, which disproportionately addict and kill Black Americans. After a half century of big tobacco marketing menthol cigarettes to the Black community, the FDA is pressured to enact a ban. All right. So they talk about Theo Wilson. And in this picture here is Theo Wilson and his grandmother. But they talk about how Theo Wilson avoided smoking cigarettes most of his adult life. He remembered the smell of menthol from his childhood, the smell of his father's cigarettes, his aunts and his grandmother's, the minty smell of the cigarettes. Secondhand smoke gave him childhood asthma. The smell of the cigarettes that cut his grandmother's life short. But in 2018, when he portrayed an Iraq war veteran in a play in Denver, his character was expected to smoke a marijuana cigarette on stage. The prop master got him an e-cigarette with a blinking blue light at the end, wrapping it in rolling paper to look convincing. After everything he knew, after railing against smoking, he got hooked. After everything he knew, after railing against smoking, he got hooked. Over-the-counter minty e-cigarettes became fat vape pens. Vaping turned into menthol and clove tobacco cigarettes. Okay? Over-the-counter minty e-cigarettes became fat vape pens. Vaping turned into menthol and clove tobacco cigarettes. He bombed Cools and Newports, two of the most popular menthol brands. He bummed them off musicians he played with, off the former felons he knew, their own habits developing because these cigarettes were see in the yard. These cigarettes were currency in prison. I think Derek Chauvin probably needs a whole bunch. He needs a whole truckload of some cools right about now. Quote, I couldn't put it down until one day I was driving to a nightclub and I couldn't breathe, Theo Wilson said, who's 39 years old. He said it took him a year to quit. It took him a year to quit. Now, there are approximately 600 ingredients in cigarettes. I don't know how many people know this. Okay? There are approximately 600 ingredients in cigarettes. Only a fraction are listed on the package. Okay? Let me pull it, see. Let's look at this. American Lung Association. Now, people that know me, I don't smoke cigarettes. I don't use marijuana. I don't smoke marijuana. I don't use any type of drugs. I don't drink alcohol. I don't do any of that. That's how you attack a people. And this is why, and it's like, I have, some Facebook friends that smoke weed. You can read some of their stupid ass comments and tell when they're high. That's a way how you suppress a people, how you keep a people from fighting back, how you keep a people from advancing. You flood them with alcohol. You put liquor stores in their communities on every other corner and flood their communities with alcohol to keep them drunk. You put marijuana dispensaries in their communities. You market marijuana usage to them and drug usage to them in their music for the past 30 years, even when it was illegal. Even when marijuana was illegal in most states, it was marketed to us through negative corporate control hip hop. You have to ask the question, why? What are you trying to accomplish? You have to ask the question, what type of warfare are you engaging in with the messaging? Now, there are approximately 600 ingredients in cigarettes. When burned, cigarettes create more than 7,000 chemicals. At least 69 of these chemicals are known to cause cancer, and many are toxic. Many of these chemicals are also found in consumer products, but these products have warning labels, such as rat poison packaging. This is from the American Lung Association. What's in cigarettes? You remember me saying that you got people who say that now you can do what you want to with the vaccine. Consult with your doctor. Consult with medical professionals. Consult with people who have medical credentials and know your medical history when it comes to the vaccine. But you have people who say they're not taking the vaccine, but they smoke cigarettes. There's 600 ingredients in cigarettes. Only a fraction are listed on the package. Okay, I want to see if I can zoom in on this. I'll give you the link and zoom in on this as much as possible. Okay, except cookies. Let's look at this. This is from the American Lung Association. There are approximately 600 ingredients in cigarettes. When burned, cigarettes create more than 7,000 chemicals. At least 69 of these chemicals are known to cause cancer. They're called carcinogens. And many are toxic. Many of these chemicals are found in consumer products, but these products have warning labels, such as rat poison packaging. While the public is warned about the danger of the poisons in these products, there's no such warning for the toxins in tobacco smoke. So when burned, cigarettes create more than 7,000 chemicals. So they're marketing cancer sticks to us. They're marketing death to us. There's death in the liquor stores, flooding communities with alcohol. There's death in the cancer sticks that are being marketed to us. Then, you got a lot of people who smoke marijuana, but, speak negatively about the vaccine. But you go to a white-owned marijuana dispensary and buy your weed and you smoke it. You go to a white-owned marijuana dispensary and buy your weed and smoke it. You say you don't know what's in the vaccine, but you don't know what's in the marijuana either. Unless maybe you grow it yourself. Most people that smoke marijuana don't grow it themselves. Some of these same people smoke cigarettes. You don't know what's in the cigarettes either. There's 600 chemicals in the cigarettes, 600 ingredients, I should say, 600 ingredients approximately in cigarettes. Now, here are a few of the chemicals in tobacco smoke in other places they are found. Acetone, found in nail polish remover. Acetic acid, an ingredient in hair dye. Ammonia, a common household cleaner. Arsenic, used in rat poison. Benzene, found in rubber, cement, and gasoline. Butane, used in lighter fluid. Cadmium, active component in battery acid. Carbon monoxide, released in car exhaust fumes. Okay. Dr. David Fowler tried to say that George Floyd died of carbon monoxide, okay, poison coming from the exhaust pipe, but he didn't know whether the car was on or off. I asked the question, well, if carbon monoxide did contribute to George Floyd's death, right? Who put his face near the exhaust pipe? Wasn't that the police? Who kept his face near the exhaust pipe for 9 minutes and 29 seconds? Wasn't that Derek Chauvin? So wouldn't that mean Derek Chauvin would be partly responsible for his death? Formaldehyde, embalming fluid. Hexamine, found in barbecue lighter fluid. Now there's a fire. Lead, used in batteries. Naphthalene, an ingredient in mothballs. Methanol, a main component in rocket fuel. Fly me to the moon. Nicotine, used as an insecticide. Tar, material for paving roads. Okay. Toluene, used to manufacture paint. Okay. There's tar. So I want people to understand this, right? Because there's a lot of simple Simon ass people on social media. And proper documentation ends all conversation. That I provide you with the evidence. You go research this yourself. You don't have to believe me. You don't have to believe a word that I say. Proper documentation ends all conversation. Here are a few, just a few. Here are a few of the chemicals in tobacco smoke and other places they are found. Okay. Now, we need to analyze what's in marijuana smoke. With tobacco smoke, there's a filter. I mean, with cigarettes, there's a filter. Now, it don't do you much good when you inhaling the smoke that's in the air. But what's in the marijuana smoke that you go buy from the dispensary? What's in that? All right. So check out this article here from the American Lung Association. What's in a cigarette? Check out that article. And this is good. The menthol cigarettes need to be banned. And they're disproportionately targeting African Americans with menthol cigarettes, targeting us for death. So let's go back to this article here from the Washington Post. How's everybody doing? We'll be here for a few more minutes because I taught a 2.5-hour class tonight and I'm tired. I taught that before doing this show. So as Black Americans continue to suffer disproportionate health consequences of addiction to menthol cigarettes, the Food and Drug Administration this month must respond to a court order demanding it take a position on whether to ban the product. Now, the FDA has long targeted menthol cigarettes for a regulatory crackdown amid warnings from doctors and other public health experts that the products are easier to smoke, the products are easier to start smoking, harder to quit, and cause outsized harm to African Americans. The Food and Drug Administration has long targeted menthol cigarettes for a regulatory crackdown amid warnings from doctors and other public health experts that the products are easier to start smoking, harder to quit, and cause outsized harm to African Americans. But the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, has held back because of opposition from the tobacco industry. And the tobacco industry spends tens of millions of dollars a year on lobbying and argues menthol cigarettes have not been shown to be more toxic than regular ones. So what you're saying is menthol cigarettes are just going to be as bad for your health as regular cigarettes. They're not going to be worse than regular cigarettes. They're just going to be as bad for your health as regular cigarettes. That's what you're saying. Now, opposition has also come from GOP and Democratic officials, as well as civil rights groups and leaders, including the American Civil Liberties Union and Reverend Al Sharpton, who have said that banning menthol would risk police targeting Black Americans for selling illegal cigarettes. Banning menthol would risk police targeting Black Americans for selling illegal cigarettes. Now the agency must respond by April 29th to a citizen petition, a unique regulatory tool that allows the public to request the FDA consider policy changes demanding menthol cigarettes be banned. Now, advocates of the ban cite a litany of health effects. Only 29% of white smokers choose menthol cigarettes, as opposed to 85% of African Americans. Only 29% of white smokers choose menthol cigarettes, as opposed to 85% of African American smokers, according to a national survey on drug use and health, fueled by more than half a century of big tobacco aggressively marketing them specifically to African Americans. Now, although African Americans smoke less than white Americans in general, African American men have the highest rates of lung cancer in the United States, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The number one cause of preventable death among African Americans, tobacco claims 45,000 Black lives each year. The number one cause of preventable death among African Americans is cigarettes. Tobacco claims 45,000 Black lives each year. Carol McGruder, co-chair of the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council, an advocacy group that has also sued to force the FDA to take action on menthol, says menthol cigarette bans have been bargained out of tighter tobacco and vaping legislation for more than a decade, but that the time has come for the FDA to take action. Okay, she said that menthol cigarette bans have been bargained out of tighter tobacco and vaping legislation for more than a decade, but that the time has come for the FDA to take action. Quote, for years, this has been an underdog issue that was not on the radar, but over time, people have become educated and engaged. We are suing the FDA now to compel them to do what they were charged to do, to take menthol off the market. Carol Magruder said. The lawsuit alleged that the FDA had unreasonably delayed issuing a final response to the citizen petition. All right. Let's see here. Okay, read the rest of this article. There was one also from the root.com that dealt with this topic as well. So check this out. FDA weighs ban on menthol cigarettes, which disproportionately addict and kill African Americans. And I've talked about this before, how, one of the best-selling albums in hip-hop history was called The Chronic from Dr. Dre. And the Chronic is not just marijuana. The Chronic is a more potent form of marijuana. Okay? You have to understand that marijuana usage has been marketed to us for the past 30 years or so through hip-hop. You have to ask the question why, because other forms of music, you listen to pop music and things like that, other forms of music, even though you'll hear a reference here or there, is not as prevalent. Marijuana usage is not as prevalent in a lot of other popular forms of music, top 40 music, pop music. The mentioning of it in the songs is not as prevalent. You hear it a little bit, but it's much more in negative corporate control hip hop. You have to ask the question why? Because there's a greater prevalence of alcohol usage marketed in our music as well. You have to ask the question why? All right, everybody be sure to register for my new online course that starts up Saturday, April 24th. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. We deal with thousands of years of history and what led up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. We just posted the link here, and when you click on the link, it takes you to our page on Learn World. This is an online class you can watch from around the world. We deal with thousands of years of history, and we do what led up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place also. So I do a PowerPoint presentation. We have book references, video clips, everything. And we also deal with the African presence in the Americas dating back tens of thousands of years ago, even before Native Americans came into existence, okay? And we know the Khoisan were here in this land that we call the United States of America, going back at least 51,700 years ago. One of the sources I use in the class, you don't have to buy any of these books, but one of the sources is The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence by Dr. David M. Hotep. All right. And his book has 713 footnotes and thoroughly documents the African presence in this country dating back tens of thousands of years ago. Also, I use this as well. We reference this some also. This study from the Southern Poverty Law Center, Teaching Hard History American Slavery. Teaching Hard History American Slavery. Let's use that some as just a reference, and this is something you can use with your children and your children's schools also, because the study documents how the history of slavery is being incorrectly taught in schools all across the country, and it makes numerous recommendations on how to more correctly teach that history. The chair on the advisory board was Dr. Hassan Kwame Jeffries. Dr. Hassan Kwame Jeffries, who's associate professor of history at Ohio State University. I've interviewed him before. I've interviewed him here on the show, and he's a nephew to one of my teachers, Dr. Leonard Jeffries. All right. Also, if you like this type of information, you can support the African History Network, $ the AHN show through Cash App, $ the AHN show through Cash App, and then also through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN show. So us keep broadcasting 6 days a week, keep doing the research, stay on the air, keep broadcasting. All right, we have to get out of here. Remember, at the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now it's corrects wrong behaviors. Not over till we win. Wakanda forever. We'll talk to you tomorrow night. Peace.